Here's something that might surprise you about 1962. While Detroit was pushing bigger, longer, wider automobiles with engines that could power a small tugboat, the very last Nash Metropolitan rolled off the assembly line in England. That final car, serial number E95981, represented the end of an audacious experiment that had begun nearly a decade earlier. Think about America in the late 1940s and early 1950s. The suburbs were exploding. Women who'd worked in factories during the war weren't ready to give up their independence. Families were discovering they needed a second car. Not for prestige, but for practical daily errands. And while every other manufacturer in Detroit was following the bigger is better philosophy, one man had a radically different vision. George Mason, the cigar-chomping president of Nash Kelvinator, looked at the American landscape and saw something nobody else did. An opportunity for what we'd now call a subcompact car, though that term didn't even exist yet. The Metropolitan wasn't meant to be cheap transportation. Mason insisted it should be an economical premium car. Small, yes, but with style and comfort. He called it minimum transportation, and he was betting millions that American buyers were ready for it. The story of the Nash Metropolitan matters because it represents one of the boldest gambles in American automotive history. This was a car designed in Wisconsin, built entirely in England, and marketed specifically to women at a time when such targeting was revolutionary. It was smaller than a Volkswagen Beetle but tried to deliver Nash luxury. It achieved fuel economy numbers that wouldn't look out of place today, and against all conventional wisdom it actually sold nearly 95,000 of them over its production run. So let's talk about how this little Anglo-American creation became a legend, why it ultimately failed, and what it teaches us about the automotive industry's eternal struggle between innovation and market reality. The origins. The Metropolitan story begins not in 1953, but back in 1947, when Nash Motors Company started developing a concept for a truly small car. George Mason wasn't some wild-eyed dreamer. He'd successfully steered Nash through the Depression and understood the American market. But he also understood that the post-war boom was creating new patterns of car ownership. Nash approached several European manufacturers about building this car because the economics were brutally simple. Tooling up a new assembly line in America would cost approximately $20 million, far more than potential returns could justify. But by using existing European components and adding only unique body panels, they could do it for just $2 million. On October 5, 1952, Nash announced they'd selected the Austin Motor Company in Birmingham, England, along with Fisher and Ludlow, for body production. This wasn't just about saving money. Austin had the components Nash needed: engines, transmissions, suspension parts, already in production for their small cars. The Americans would provide the design, the British would provide the engineering and manufacturing. The design itself came from independent stylist William Flageolet, who'd been shopping his concept around Detroit without success. When he brought it to Nash, Mason and his assistant George Romney saw potential. They built a prototype called the NXY, Nash Experimental International, using a Fiat Topolino chassis, and sent it on a cross-country tour in 1950. Romney personally attended these survey previews in major cities to gauge public reaction. The feedback was encouraging enough that Nash commissioned a production version. The car featured several improvements from the prototype: roll-up glass windows instead of side curtains, a more powerful engine, and a column-mounted transmission shifter with a bench seat rather than the original bucket seats with floor shift. Initially called the NKI Custom for Nash Kelvinator International, the name was changed to Metropolitan just 2 months before production began. Nash dealers actually had to rebadge early cars, and some service manuals went out with the old NKI name. Production at Austin's Longbridge factory started in October 1953, with the first cars going on sale March 19, 1954. The car that emerged was tiny even by the standards of economy cars. With an 85-inch wheelbase and overall length of just 149.5 inches, it was actually 11 inches shorter than a Volkswagen Beetle. The convertible weighed just 1,785 pounds, the hardtop 1,825 pounds. Technical specifications, Series 1 through IV. Let me walk you through what actually powered these little machines, because the specifications tell an important story about evolution and compromise. The original Series 1 Metropolitan, produced from October 1953 through March 1954, used an overhead valve 1,200 cubic centimeter straight-four Austin 040 engine, producing just 42 horsepower. That's right, 42 horsepower. For context, a 1954 Plymouth with a flathead 6 made 110 horsepower. The compression ratio was a low 7.2 to 1, allowing it to run on poor quality gasoline, but performance was glacial. Contemporary road tests reported 0 to 60 times around 30 seconds, nearly double that of the most basic Plymouth Savoy. That engine drove the rear wheels through a 3-speed manual transmission with column-mounted shifter, no floor shift, no 4-speed option. Brakes were 4-wheel drums all around. Standard equipment included features that were optional on most economy cars: electric windshield wipers, a map light, turn signals, dual sun visors, and a Continental-style rear-mounted spare tire with cover. The Series Y had a suggested retail price of $1,445 for the hardtop and $1,469 for the convertible. Compare that to the average American home price of around $12,000 in 1954, and you realize these weren't impulse purchases. After the first 10,000 cars, Series 2 arrived in August 1954 with the same 1,200 cubic centimeter displacement, but switching to Austin's B-Series engine from the A40 Cambridge. More importantly, they added hydraulic clutch actuation. The Series Y had used mechanical linkage, which was already feeling outdated. This change added 50 pounds to the curb weight. The real transformation came with Series 3, introduced in November 1955. Nash finally addressed the power complaints by boring out the B-Series engine to 1,489 cubic centimeters, call it 91 cubic inches in American terms. Power jumped to 52 horsepower at 4,500 RPM with 78 pound-feet of torque at 2,500 RPM. That's a 24% power increase, and drivers noticed immediately. Series 3 also brought styling changes. Gone was the non-functional hood scoop of earlier cars. The bar-type grille gave way to a mesh design with bright metal surround. Most distinctively, a Z-shaped chrome side trim allowed proper two-tone paint schemes. These weren't just cosmetic. The two-tone designs helped disguise the Metropolitan's stubby proportions and made it look more expensive. Fuel economy with the larger engine was still remarkable. Official testing showed 41.7 miles per gallon in a 24-hour non-stop run at an average speed of 35 miles per hour. Contemporary road tests reported 37 to 40 miles per gallon in mixed driving, numbers that would be impressive even today. Series 3 pricing increased to $1,587 for the hardtop and $1,611 for the convertible in 1957. Still competitive, but the gap with larger domestic compacts was narrowing. The final iteration, Series 4, arrived in January 1959 with the most significant changes yet. Engineers finally addressed the Metropolitan's most criticized feature, the lack of exterior trunk access. Previous owners had to fold down the rear seatback and crawl through the interior to reach their luggage, ridiculous by any standard. Series 4 added a proper external deck lid and revised the rear window to a single solid pane. They also added vent windows in the doors, improving ventilation in an era before air conditioning was common. The compression ratio increased from 7.2 to 1 all the way to 8.3 to 1, boosting power to 55 horsepower at 4,200 RPM and 81 pound-feet of torque at 2,400 RPM. This was the engine from the Austin A55 Cambridge. Series 4 cars carried wider 13-inch tires, 5.60/13 size, for better road stability. The additional features added 15 pounds to the weight. Pricing reached $1,672.60 for the hardtop, $1,696.80 for the convertible. Top speed of a fully developed Series 4 Metropolitan was approximately 78 to 80 miles per hour. Not fast, but adequate for interstate travel, which was becoming increasingly important as America built its highway system. Marketing and market reception. Here's where the Metropolitan story gets really interesting, and where Nash made both brilliant and questionable decisions. The Metropolitan was explicitly marketed as the first post-war American car designed specifically for women. Think about that for a moment. In 1954, such targeting was revolutionary. The first spokesperson was Evelyn A. Sempier, Miss America 1954. Advertising showed smartly dressed women loading shopping bags into the trunk, dropping kids at school, running errands. Dad, meanwhile, took the big car to the train station for his commute. This marketing strategy was both ahead of its time and ultimately limiting. Mason genuinely believed he was serving an underserved market, suburban women who needed practical transportation. But by so explicitly targeting female buyers, Metropolitan inadvertently made the car less appealing to men who might otherwise have considered it. The Dodge La Femme, introduced a year later with similar female-focused marketing, failed even faster. Initial sales exceeded expectations. In the first month, 862 Metropolitans sold in the United States and Canada. In the first 6 months, 7,042 found homes. For calendar year 1954, Nash shipped 13,162 units, exceeding their initial 10,000 unit projection by nearly a third. But then reality set in. In 1955, when nearly every other car in America sold better than ever, Metropolitan shipments plunged nearly 54% to just 6,096 units. The novelty had worn off, and the car's limitations became apparent. It was genuinely slow by American standards. Road Test magazine might have praised its handling and fuel economy, but Americans in 1955 wanted power, not parsimony. Nash merged with Hudson in May 1954 to form American Motors Corporation, and starting in August 1954, Metropolitans became available through both Nash and Hudson dealers. Hudson Metropolitans wore different badges, Hudson grill emblems, hubcaps with an M logo, a bullseye horn button, but were otherwise identical. The Series 3 facelift in late 1955 helped. Sales recovered somewhat, but never reached 1954 levels until the arrival of Series 4. 1959 marked the peak, with 22,209 units sold, the highest single-year total in Metropolitan history. That success led AMC to believe they had a winner. They were wrong. By 1960, Metropolitan sales fell 20%, while Rambler sales rose 25%. The problem was obvious. The Rambler American, which offered seating for 5 people and more trunk space, cost only about $100 more than a Metropolitan. If you were spending $1,500+ anyway, why not get the bigger car? Contemporary journalists and enthusiasts had mixed reactions. Automotive publisher Floyd Clymer subjected several Metropolitans to brutal testing and came away impressed. He took a 1957 hardtop through a grueling 2,912-mile road test that included driving 14,100 feet up Pikes Peak. His conclusion: he couldn't praise the Metropolitan highly enough for handling, performance and ride quality relative to expectations. Road Test magazine in 1954 wrote, "On roadability and responsive handling, the Met shines. On several occasions I took familiar corners at speeds half again what I would dare to use in some cars of twice the weight." They understood what Mason was trying to achieve, a car where proper weight distribution and low center of gravity mattered more than mass and long wheelbases. But Motor Trend, while praising economy and fuel consumption, dismissed the rear utility seat as a joke. Car Life called it fun to drive and ideal for a second car, but that faint praise revealed the problem. It was always positioned as somebody's second car, never the main family vehicle. The Nash Hudson AMC identity crisis. The Metropolitan suffered from an identity crisis that perfectly reflected the chaos of the independent automaker mergers in the 1950s. When Hudson and Nash merged in January 1954, suddenly this little car wore two different badges depending on which dealership sold it. Nash dealers got Nash Metropolitans. Hudson dealers got Hudson Metropolitans. Same car, different emblems, different marketing materials. Confusing for consumers? Absolutely. In September 1957, AMC made a crucial decision. They dropped both the Nash and Hudson brand names. The Rambler became AMC's main mark. But the Metropolitan, it became its own standalone brand, sold through Rambler dealers with just a stylized M on the hubcaps and grille. No Nash, no Hudson, no AMC, just Metropolitan. This might seem like a small detail, but it reveals AMC's struggle to figure out where this odd little car fit in their lineup. Was it premium, economy, import fighter? Even they couldn't decide. From December 1956, Austin acquired rights to sell the Metropolitan outside North America. Starting April 1957, right-hand drive versions went on sale in the United Kingdom through Austin dealers at £713, 17 shillings for the hardtop, £725, 2 shillings for the convertible. The cars carried Austin chassis plates but no Austin badges. They were sold simply as Metropolitans. British reception was lukewarm at best. With its enclosed front wheels, chrome-laden styling and distinctly American proportions, the Metropolitan looked bizarre next to sober British Motor Corporation products. British journalist Brian Sewell later called it a preposterous aberration incorporating the worst of everything American. Approximately 5,000 sold in the UK over 4 years, respectable but hardly a success. The beginning of the end. Production ceased on April 19, 1961, with the assembly of car number E95981. But here's the interesting part. Because Austin and AMC had built up substantial inventory, cars continued to be sold as 1962 models starting October 6, 1961. The official end was announced March 23, 1962, when fewer than 1,000 cars remained in stock. Why did it end? The usual answer points to tooling wear. After nearly 8 years and 95,000 cars, the original tooling had simply worn out. Retooling would have cost millions that AMC couldn't justify given falling sales. But the deeper truth is more complex. The American market had changed fundamentally between 1954 and 1962. In 1954, no domestic manufacturer offered anything like the Metropolitan. By 1962, Ford had the Falcon, Chevrolet had the Corvair, Plymouth had the Valiant, and even AMC had the Rambler American. All offered more space, more power, and often similar fuel economy to the Metropolitan at similar prices. The import situation had also shifted. In 1954, Foreign cars were curiosities. By 1962, Volkswagen had established a serious dealer network, and buyers could get a Beetle with better build quality and a strong reputation for reliability. The Metropolitan's unique position as an affordable, economical small car had evaporated. Interestingly, some claimed the last 5 serial numbers, E95982 through 95986, were built in reverse order, all as right-hand drive models for export markets. The highest number, E95986, was built in September 1960, while the last North American car was built April 19th, 1961. Total production approximately 95,000 Metropolitans for Nash, Hudson, and AMC, plus about 9,400 for Austin to sell in other markets. Not massive numbers, but enough to wear out the original tooling and create a lasting cult following, current values, and collector interest. So what's a 1962 Metropolitan worth today? The answer depends heavily on condition, originality, and which body style you're discussing. Recent auction data shows 1962 Metropolitan values ranging from around $5,500 at the low end to nearly $20,000 for exceptional examples. The December 2024 Mecum, Kansas City auction saw one sell for $5,500, while a pristine example reached $19,935 at an earlier sale. The average across all Metropolitan years hovers around $15,645. Series 4 cars, those built from 1959 to 1962, command slight premiums because of the external trunk access and vent windows. Convertibles typically bring 10 to 20% more than hardtops in similar condition. These aren't big money cars, and that's part of their appeal. You can get into Metropolitan ownership for less than many modern used cars. The parts situation is surprisingly good because the Austin B-Series engine was used in numerous British cars including the MGA 1500. Austin A30, A40 and A55 Cambridge parts interchange in many areas. There's an active Metropolitan Owners Club of North America, and specialty parts suppliers exist. The collector market appreciates Metropolitans for several reasons. First, they're genuinely rare. 95,000 cars over 8 years means few survive in good condition 60-plus years later. Second, they represent an important moment in American automotive history when one manufacturer dared to swim against the current. Third, they're practical classics that won't bankrupt you on gas or insurance. Famous owners have included Elvis Presley, Paul Newman, Steve Jobs, Jimmy Buffett, and even Princess Margaret of Britain. That celebrity connection adds to the mystique, though it doesn't dramatically affect values. Cultural significance and legacy. Here's what makes the Nash Metropolitan genuinely significant. Beyond its sales numbers or collector values, it proved that American manufacturers could think small, even if the lesson wasn't widely learned. The Metropolitan was America's first true subcompact, predating that classification by decades. It demonstrated that overseas manufacturing could work for American brands. It showed that women were a viable target market for purpose-designed vehicles, even if the execution was flawed, and it achieved fuel economy numbers that wouldn't be matched by domestic cars for another 2 decades. Most importantly, the Metropolitan's success in 1959, those 22,000-plus sales, helped convince the Big Three that Americans would buy smaller cars. Ford had been watching Metropolitan sales closely. The Falcon, introduced for 1960, owed a conceptual debt to Mason's vision, even if the execution was entirely different. American Motors itself learned crucial lessons. The company survived into the 1980s partly because George Romney and his successors understood that fuel-efficient compacts like the Rambler American could compete against Detroit's giants. That philosophy, small, efficient, practical, sustained AMC through oil embargoes and into the 70s with the Gremlin and Pacer. The Metropolitan also represented one of the last projects of the American independent automakers before consolidation swept them away. Nash, Hudson, Studebaker, Packard, Kaiser Frazer. By 1962, only AMC and Studebaker remained, and Studebaker was on borrowed time. The Metropolitan stands as evidence that the independents could innovate, could read market trends, and could execute ambitious plans even with limited resources. Today, Metropolitans turn heads at car shows precisely because they're so different from the chrome-laden behemoths that dominated 1950s automotive imagery. They're approachable, charming, and refreshingly honest about their limitations. You can't pretend a Metropolitan is something it's not. It's a small, economical runabout that does exactly what it promises. So here's what we know about the 1962 Nash Metropolitan and its place in automotive history. It was an audacious gamble by George Mason and Nash Kelvinator that succeeded far beyond reasonable expectations. 95,000 sales when most predicted failure. It was a genuinely international collaboration at a time when such arrangements were rare. American design, British manufacturing, components from the Austin parts bin, all coming together at a $2 million development cost that made the whole project viable. It was explicitly marketed to women in an era when that was revolutionary, though that very targeting probably limited its ultimate success. It achieved fuel economy, 37 to 41 miles per gallon, that remains impressive 60-plus years later. And it proved that a car could be small without being cheap, economical without being unpleasant. The Metropolitan failed ultimately not because it was a bad car, but because the market moved past it. By 1962, Americans could buy domestic compacts that offered more space and power at similar prices, or imports like the Volkswagen with better reputation for reliability. The Metropolitan's unique niche had disappeared, and AMC correctly decided not to invest in retooling. But that doesn't diminish what Mason and Nash accomplished. They created a legend, a small but mighty car that did exactly what? It promised and carved out a space in automotive history that it occupies alone. Now, I want to hear from you. Did you or your family own a Metropolitan? Do you remember seeing these little cars around your neighborhood in the late 1950s and early 1960s? What do you think? Was George Mason ahead of his time, or did he simply misread what Americans really wanted? Leave your memories and thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into an often overlooked chapter of American automotive history, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. Give us a thumbs up if you'd like to see more content about the independent automakers who tried to compete with the big three. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most interesting stories in automotive history come from the cars that didn't dominate the sales charts, but dared to be different.